Amid the green plains of Belgium, in the small village of Tremelo, a boy named Joseph de Veuster was born on January 3rd, 1840. From a deeply Catholic family devoted to rural work, Joseph grew up between faith and the simplicity of the countryside, breathing the air of Christian piety from an early age. He was the seventh of 8 children in a home where prayer was as constant as work. His parents, João Francisco and Ana Catarina, not only supported their children with their own sweat, but also with the example of virtue and devotion. Among the siblings, there was one who was already moving toward the priesthood, a fact that would profoundly mark Joseph. From his youth, little Joseph showed a spirit of sacrifice and an uncommon inner strength. Although he was not much inclined toward formal studies, his soul was ardent and filled with a desire for God. He dreamed of great ideals, nurturing a growing love for the Church's mission. In 1858, influenced by his older brother Auguste, who had joined the Congregation of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, Joseph also decided to follow this path. He entered the novitiate of the congregation in Louvain, adopting the religious name of Damien, in honor of the Christian martyr who, together with his brother Cosme, dedicated himself to the poor and the sick. His missionary zeal grew day by day, inflamed by readings about the work in distant lands. Although the difficulties of Latin and clerical studies were many, the congregation recognized in him a fervent soul, ready for sacrifice. Damien was more heart than intellect, but it was a heart of fire. When Auguste fell ill and could not embark on the mission to Hawaii, Damien offered to replace him. It was a choice that would mark eternity. The congregation accepted his proposal, and in 1863, at only 23 years old, he set sail for the Pacific archipelago, unaware that he would never again return to his homeland. The journey was long and arduous. For months, he faced the sea, storms, and homesickness, but he kept his eyes fixed on the crucifix. With each prayer, he asked God for the strength to remain faithful to the end. In his heart, he already offered himself as a holocaust in the service of the most forgotten. Upon arriving in Hawaii, he was received hospitably by the local missionaries. Damien immersed himself in studying the native language and the Hawaiian people's culture, showing a sincere desire for enculturation. His ability to adapt and his captivating smile quickly won hearts. In 1864, he was ordained a priest in Honolulu. Celebrating his first Mass with tears in his eyes, he definitively offered himself to the Lord. The young priest was now a true laborer in the Lord's vineyard, ready for the harvest, even if it required his own blood. He began his pastoral work among the various Hawaiian islands, serving small communities, visiting the sick, baptizing, hearing confessions, and building chapels with his own hands. His life was marked by an untiring missionary spirit and paternal tenderness. It was at that time that he began to hear dark stories about the island of Molokai, where lepers were sent as exiles from society. It was a colony of suffering, pain, and abandonment, a place many feared, but that touched Father Damien's heart deeply. The reports were disheartening. Hundreds of men, women, and children lived in subhuman conditions, without medical assistance, without sacraments, and plunged into misery. The Hawaiian government had created that colony as a sanitary solution, but in practice, it was a land of those condemned to death. In 1873, in response to an appeal from Bishop Maigret, who was seeking volunteers to attend spiritually to the lepers of Molokai, Father Damien rose among the others and offered himself. He knew what that meant. It was like digging his own grave. But love moved him. The bishop warned that whoever went should go with a heart willing never to return. Damien responded humbly, "I accept and I ask God for the grace to be faithful to the end." Thus, he boarded for Kalaupapa, the region of the island where lepers were confined, as one departs for martyrdom. Upon stepping onto Molokai, Damien saw with his own eyes what he had previously only heard with his heart. Mutilated bodies, disfigured faces, abandoned children, rampant vice, and a pain that saturated the air. It was a true valley of tears, but he was not frightened. He only prayed. With no structure whatsoever, he began living among the sick as one of them. The first thing he did was build a small church with the help of the lepers themselves. There he celebrated Holy Mass, renewing hope in that forgotten people. The presence of Christ returned to that accursed land. His love was concrete. He cared for wounds, dug graves, taught catechism, built houses, organized community life, and above all, called each one by name. He wanted to restore dignity to those souls. In every disfigured face, he saw Christ himself suffering. At first, he was regarded with suspicion. The lepers were accustomed to being treated as pariahs, but over time, they saw that this priest was different. He did not avoid them. He did not wear scarves over his face. He did not fear contagion. He embraced them as children. He founded the Association of Catholic Lepers, organizing meetings, times of prayer, and small liturgical feasts. Spiritual life blossomed amid the pain. Little by little, Kalaupapa began to transform. Where there had been despair, he sowed faith. Where there had been misery, he planted charity. With the help of brothers and volunteers, he built a school for the children and an improvised hospital. Education and health began to regain a place in that marginalized island. Damien's simple gestures were like daily miracles wrought by the power of charity. His fame spread throughout the archipelago. Many considered him a madman, others a saint. To the lepers, he was the father they never had. Damien not only served the sick, he loved them. His heart belonged entirely to that land of suffering. He faced opposition from local authorities and even some doctors who did not understand his motivation. He was called a fanatic, reckless, insane, but he responded with silence and prayer, firm as a rock. He knew his mission was to please God, not men. He lived in total poverty, relying on donations that were barely sufficient. Often he went hungry along with his leprous children. His clothes were worn out, his sandals full of holes, but his spirit remained unbreakable. He said, "As long as I have a breath of life, I will be here." His interior life was intense. He spent long hours before the Blessed Sacrament, asking for strength. Amid the rotting of the flesh, he cultivated purity of soul. The Eucharist was his daily sustenance, and in moments of anguish, he took refuge in the arms of the Virgin Mary. After a few years of total dedication, a sign appeared on his skin, a spot on his hand, a wound that would not heal. Damien understood. He too had been touched by leprosy. But far from despairing, he raised his eyes to heaven and whispered, "Now I am one of you." The leprosy he had once confronted in others with compassion now consumed his own flesh. But there was no complaint on his lips. He welcomed the disease as a grace, as confirmation of his total identification with those he served. Now he was both priest and victim. When he publicly announced that he was leprous, he did not do so with fear, but with serenity. He said, "We lepers." And with those words, he definitively conquered the community's hearts. There was no longer any separation between him and the sick. He was one of them, a father among children who suffer. His body began to show the characteristic signs of the disease. His skin became deformed, his limbs lost feeling, and the pain intensified. Even so, Damien continued his daily tasks with heroic dedication. It was as if suffering fed his love. As his health deteriorated, his soul grew stronger. His homilies became even more ardent, his presence more consoling, his moral authority unquestionable. For the lepers, he was now not just a shepherd, but a living martyr, a symbol of crucified love. Many missionaries from other orders, inspired by his example, began to visit Molokai. Among them were Sister Marianne Cope and other Franciscan nuns who came to help care for the sick. The small colony was becoming a sanctuary of Christian charity. Father Damien's letters, sent to his congregation and to civil authorities, became prophetic cries. He denounced the colony's neglect, demanded better conditions, and called for justice and dignity. His words crossed oceans, echoing in hearts in Europe and the United States. It was during this period that he wrote to the Hawaiian government, to the press, and even to Queen Lili Wakalani, pleading for help for the lepers. His zeal surpassed the island's walls. He became a voice for the voiceless, a true advocate for the forgotten. The attacks did not cease. Some accused him of exaggeration, opportunism, or even reckless contamination. But his response remained always in the gospel. He said, "Leprosy is a gift because it allowed me to live what Christ lived, to be rejected by men, but loved by God." The small oratory he built soon became the living center of the colony. There, at each Mass, the lepers united themselves to Christ's suffering and found consolation. Damien made liturgy a space of redemption, where even the most mutilated felt restored. The Eucharist was at the center of everything. Even with deformed hands and feet covered in wounds, he celebrated with incomparable devotion. His masses were like living tears, and each elevation of the host was a silent plea for those suffering around him. Amid all the difficulties, Father Damien never lost his sense of humor and tenderness. He played with the children, cheered the adults, taught liturgical songs, and held religious celebrations. Joy sprang from suffering like lilies emerging among stones. His presence was constant. From morning to night he visited the huts, administered the sacraments, applied ointments, dressed wounds, and carried the dead to the cemetery. Nothing stopped him. Leprosy might consume his flesh, but his soul was free and ardent. Over time, the colony came to be recognized as an example of dignity and organization. Damien had established a true civilization of love in the midst of despair. Not through theories, but through concrete gestures rooted in the cross of Christ. His spirituality deepened, solitude and pain became for him a school of contemplation. He said, "On the cross, with Jesus, everything makes sense." And it was common to see him in prolonged prayer, even with a weakened body, always united to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. He welcomed with joy any little help that arrived from outside. When they sent him a chalice and a stole, he treated them as treasures. He knew that what was essential was not material comfort, but the means to continue offering the sacrifice of the Mass. Despite his geographical isolation, many came to know him around the world. Writers, doctors, and even politicians commented on the Saint of Molokai, but he never cared about fame. He said, "I am only an unprofitable servant, doing what the Lord commanded me." In his final letters, written with difficulty due to the degeneration of his fingers, Damien expressed gratitude for everything, for leprosy, for the mission, for the cross. He saw everything as a gift from God. His heart was a hymn of praise amid the trial. Over the years, his body became as fragile as clay. He could barely walk, his vision weakened, and breathing was difficult. Yet rather than withdrawing, he asked to be carried to visit the sick. Until the end, he wanted to be the presence of Christ among them. It was then that he began to prepare for his departure. He had a simple coffin built and chose the place where he wanted to be buried, among the lepers, his beloved children. He also asked that only the words, "Father Damien, Missionary of the Lepers," be written on his tombstone. On April 15, 1889, at 49 years of age, he surrendered his soul to God. He died as he had lived, among the poor, with the crucifix in his hands and peace on his face. The lepers wept as those who lose a father, and heaven, without a doubt, welcomed him as a beloved son. His body was laid in state for 3 days in the small church of St. Philomena. Hundreds of sick people came to touch his coffin, many in tears. It was like a silent procession of gratitude. They knew that this man had given everything, even his life, out of love for them. News of his death spread quickly. In Europe, the United States, and Hawaii itself, his passing was felt as the loss of a beacon of light. Newspapers published moving obituaries. He who died among the forgotten had become a universal symbol of Christian charity. Soon reports began to emerge of graces and healings attributed to his intercession. Simple people invoked him as a saint. His reputation for holiness grew, and many began to visit Molokai as pilgrims, eager to know the ground where the apostle of the lepers had lived. In 1936, his body was transferred to his native land in Belgium at the request of the government. It was received with the honors of a hero. Thousands accompanied the procession, and his memory rekindled the faith of many. The relic of his hand was left in Molokai as a sign of his eternal presence. The Church, cautious and observant, began the process of beatification. Testimonies, writings, and miracles were examined. Over time, the voice of the people and the Church's judgment converged. Father Damien was indeed a saint, a martyr of charity, a faithful servant unto death. After his death, Father Damien's spiritual presence remained alive in Molokai. The work he founded did not vanish with him. On the contrary, others assumed it, missionaries, religious and volunteers, continuing his work and keeping the flame of charity alive. Among these successors was the aforementioned Sister Marianne Cope, who would also be canonized later. Together, even in different times, these saints wove a network of love and mercy that forever marked the history of that forgotten island in the Pacific. The Congregation of the Sacred Hearts kept alive the memory of its most illustrious son. Images and relics of the missionary saint spread throughout its houses worldwide. Damien's example became the symbol of the congregation's charism, to consecrate oneself entirely to the redemptive love of Jesus. The transfer of his body to Belgium in 1936 was an event of great emotion. The urn with his remains was placed in the congregation's church in Louvain, which soon became a place of pilgrimage. Thousands came to pray at the tomb of the one who had made himself a leper among lepers. His reputation for holiness crossed the boundaries of the church. Gandhi, India's pacifist leader, once stated that if he wished to become a Christian, he would want to be like Father Damien. Such was the power of his witness that even hearts distant from the gospel felt touched. In 1955, Pope Pius V formally recognized his heroic virtues. The beatification process was taking shape, and the reported graces through Damien's intercession were many. These accounts came from Hawaii, Europe, and America, all recounting healings, conversions, and blessings credited to the missionary. On June 4, 1995, under the pontificate of St. John Paul II, the Church solemnly proclaimed his beatification. It was a moment of jubilation for the entire Church, especially for the sick and marginalized, who saw in him a true brother and defender. During the ceremony, John Paul II highlighted Damien's figure as an extraordinary witness to Christ's love for those who suffer. His life was a living echo of the parable of the Good Samaritan, not merely told, but embodied in concrete deeds. After his beatification, popular devotion grew even stronger. Churches, schools, hospitals, and charitable institutions began to bear his name. His figure inspired missionaries, religious, healthcare professionals, and lay people, all eager to live the gospel with the same radical spirit. In Molokai, his legacy endured. St. Philomena Church continued to be a place of mass and pilgrimage. The hospital he had begun retained his name and mission, and the lepers who survived the era of isolation saw in him not just a martyr, but a spiritual father. The miracle required for his canonization was recognized by the Vatican in 2008. It was an inexplicable healing from cancer of a woman in the United States, attributed to Damien's intercession. Medical and theological experts confirmed the lack of any scientific explanation. On October 11, 2009, Pope Benedict XVI canonized Saint Damien of Molokai, officially declaring him a saint of the Catholic Church. The celebration took place in St. Peter's Square in Rome, before thousands of faithful from all over the world. The Pope, in his homily, stated, "Saint Damien of Molokai offers us an example of heroic charity and fidelity to God's call." He emphasized the value of a life's witness, stronger than any words, as a means of evangelization. The canonization was especially significant for the Church in Hawaii, which now had Saint Damien as its patron. The Catholic faith gained new vigor in the region, with remarkable renewal of pastoral and missionary life in the Pacific Islands. In Catholic schools, Damien's figure was presented to young people as a model of holiness. His spirit of total self-giving, empathy, and courage touched youthful hearts, sparking vocations and the desire to serve the most needy. Several biographies, documentaries, and films were produced about his life. Historians, theologians, and filmmakers delved into his trajectory, recognizing in it a deeply human narrative, both tragic and inspiring at the same time. Damien's life transcends time. In theological circles, his figure has become emblematic of what is called a spirituality of compassion. Many scholars refer to him as an expression of the suffering servant Christ, one who incarnates himself in the other's suffering to redeem it from within. The motto that summed up his mission was simple yet profound: love to the end. This phrase, taken from the Gospel of John, was literally lived by him. Loving the lepers meant for him sharing their pain, their exclusion, their death, and also their resurrection. Saint Damien is generally depicted with a worn cassock, a straw hat, and a face marked by leprosy. These marks, far from disfiguring his holiness, accentuate it. He is a wounded saint like Christ, and therefore so close to those who suffer. In many countries, especially in the United States and Belgium, annual celebrations are held in his memory on May 10th, the liturgical date set by the Church. At these masses, the faithful renew their faith and commitment to the poorest and most marginalized. Devotion to Saint Damien is particularly strong among healthcare professionals. Doctors, nurses, and caregivers view him as a patron and model of dedication to the sick. His life offers a luminous witness of how medicine and faith can walk together. Those with incurable or contagious diseases also turn to him with confidence. His intercession is especially sought by those experiencing exclusion, fear, and constant pain. No one understands these sufferings better than Saint Damien. In Catholic missions around the world, his name is invoked for inspiration. In war zones, slums, and refugee camps, there is always someone who recalls his courage, his fearless embrace, and his unshakable faith. He has become a universal symbol of mercy. By canonizing Damien, the Church not only recognized a saint, but presented a path to the world. The path of closeness, of self-giving, of love that overcomes fear. In an era marked by isolation and indifference, his life is an antidote to the coldness of the heart. The spiritual heritage of Saint Damien of Molokai remains alive, like a seed that continues to bear fruit. Wherever someone bends over another's suffering with unconditional love, there is present the spirit of the apostle to the lepers. Saint Damien of Molokai's holiness does not belong solely to the past. It continues to enlighten present and future generations, challenging Christians to live the commandment of love with radical commitment. His life is like a living parable of the gospel, never losing its relevance. In times of health crises and pandemics, his witness came powerfully to mind once again. When the fear of contagion paralyzes the world, Saint Damien reminds us that love is stronger than death. He faced leprosy with courage, trusting fully in providence. Many priests and religious, touched by his story, decided to offer their lives in missions to the sick, the marginalized, and those who live on society's fringe. Damien became a missionary icon, called to inspire a church in going forth. His spirituality was based on the centrality of the Eucharist. He not only celebrated it, he lived it. The sacrifice of the altar extended into the sacrifice of his life, offered day after day in love for the most abandoned. The Mass was his fortress and consolation. Another pillar of his faith was devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. In the congregation of the Sacred Hearts, Damien learned to contemplate the pierced heart of Christ, source of infinite mercy. In Molokai, he truly became a visible reflection of that heart. The Virgin Mary was his inseparable mother and companion. He entrusted his fears, his pains, and his spiritual children to her. It was common to see him with a rosary in his hands, even in the midst of caring for the lepers. Mary's presence sustained his mission with maternal tenderness. Many lepers, once without faith or hope, found in Damien the path back to God. He baptized hundreds, prepared many for confirmation, celebrated countless marriages, and accompanied the dying with devotion up to the threshold of eternity. Molokai's experience teaches us that there is no place so remote, nor situation so degrading, that God cannot transform it into an altar. Through Saint Damien's presence, that cursed island became holy ground, a true field of sanctity. Contemporary theology came to recognize in his life a spirituality of incarnation. He did not heal lepers merely with words or prayers, but by immersing himself in their condition. That is precisely what the Word did. He became flesh. By identifying himself with those who suffer, Damien becomes an icon of the suffering Christ, the servant of Yahweh who takes upon himself the wounds of the world. Thus, his figure is a window onto the mystery of redemption, where human pain meets divine love. Many thinkers see in his life a prophetic testimony for today's church, a church committed to the least, unafraid to get its hands dirty with the poor, understanding mission not as power, but as service. Saint Damien also reminds us that holiness does not require spectacular feats, but rather daily faithfulness, concrete love, and silent self-offering. His life was not marked by visible miracles, but by the ongoing miracle of love lived to the fullest. His figure strongly resonates in the Church's magisterium. Pope Francis has cited him several times as an example of the smell of the sheep that every shepherd should have. In Saint Damien, we see the beauty of a priesthood lived with passion and wholeness. His humility is moving. Even while being a reference for many, he never sought personal glory. He only wanted to serve, love, console. His greatness lies precisely here, in making himself small, a slave to slaves, a servant of the most forgotten. In times of polarization and division, Saint Damien's life is an appeal to unity in love. He did not ask anyone if they were Catholic, pagan, or Protestant before helping them. For him, everyone was a child of God and deserved dignity. The countless letters he wrote are today valuable documents, not only for their historical content, but for revealing the saint's soul. They reflect his humanity, his struggle, and his unbreakable faith. They are spiritual nourishment for many. In the field of medical ethics, Saint Damien became a reference for palliative care and the ethics of closeness. His stance toward disease teaches that the true remedy is often a loving presence and respect for another's suffering. He is also an inspiration for volunteers who work in extreme situations, refugee camps, war zones, prisons, shelters. His life shows that no mission is impossible when there is faith and love. Where a willing heart exists, God acts. In Catholic universities, Damio's life is studied as an exemplary case of practical theology. He embodied all aspects of the Church's social doctrine decades before many magisterial documents were written. His biography is taught in seminaries, religious communities, and lay groups. Many feel called to a missionary vocation after learning his story. He is living proof that a life offered to God transforms the world. Saint Damien did not evangelize only with words, but also with his body, his gaze, and his deeds. His entire life became a proclamation of the kingdom. It was impossible not to perceive something divine in his presence, something that touched the soul. For the Hawaiian people, he is more than a missionary. He is a symbol of solidarity. His memory is honored in monuments, street names, museums, and civic celebrations. He is a link between local culture and the universal gospel. The Congregation of the Sacred Hearts continues its work around the world, carrying forward Damio's legacy with joy and courage. His spiritual children follow in his footsteps, eyes fixed on the Sacred Heart of Jesus. The name Damien became synonymous with compassion. Many parents give this name to their children in tribute. In simple prayers around the world, his name is uttered with affection, like calling upon a trusted friend. At the end of his life, Saint Damien could truly say, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith." And as we contemplate his story, we are invited to do the same, to live for love, to give ourselves without reserve, and always to trust in God.